Have you ever walked into a room and felt yourself shrink, as if the air itself carried the weight of someone else's contempt? A careless joke, a sarcastic remark, a subtle dismissal. It doesn't take much to cut deeper than a blade. In those moments, it isn't just embarrassment you feel. It's the quiet sting of being made small in front of others, the echo of doubt asking if your worth has somehow slipped through your fingers. I've seen this play out too many times, not just in offices or crowded gatherings, but even at dinner tables with people we thought were allies. The truth is, many don't strike because they hate you. They strike because it lifts them for a moment to see you stumble. Like shadows feeding off light, they test your reaction, hoping you'll hand them your power. The Stoics knew this well. Respect is not begged for. It is not won through anger or sharp comebacks. It is earned in the silence between provocation and response, in the steady way you hold yourself when others try to unsettle you. So the question is, when the moment comes, how will you stand? Stay with me, because the answer may change how others see you, and more importantly, how you see yourself. As we step into the first chapter, not with applause, not with admiration, but with a quiet scrutiny that measures who you are before you've spoken a single word, respect, or its absence, often begins here, long before sentences are formed, long before arguments are made. It begins in the small choices of how you carry yourself. It begins with the moment someone extends their hand and you decide whether to rise and meet them or remain still, shrinking into the chair as if the world must lean down to notice you. Now, imagine this. A crowded networking event, the kind where ambition hums in the air like static. Conversations blur, glasses clink, laughter drifts like waves against the walls. You see a figure approaching, measured steps, a confident gaze, hand outstretched. And you, caught in that moment, make a choice. Do you remain seated, offering a distracted glance and a limp handshake? Or do you stand, meet their eyes, and greet them as though this moment matters? One choice whispers indifference. The other commands respect without a single word spoken. The Stoics understood this invisible threshold. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. But it isn't only thoughts that reveal the soul, it's the quiet gestures that rise out of them. To stand when another stands before you is not mere politeness. It is philosophy in motion. It is a silent statement that you respect yourself enough to be fully present, and that you honor the dignity of another human being. I once sat in a seminar hall filled with the sharp scent of coffee and the sharper edge of competition. People came armed with business cards and practiced smiles. Some talked too much, trying to prove they belonged. Others leaned back, feigning indifference as if to say they needed no one. But among them was one man who never raised his voice, never forced himself into the spotlight. His secret was simpler. Every time someone approached, whether a senior executive with decades of authority or a waiter quietly refilling cups, he rose. He locked eyes. He gave himself fully to the moment. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't calculated. It was presence, and people noticed. By the end of the day, his name was remembered not for eloquent speeches, but for how he carried himself, how he seemed to affirm the worth of every person before him. He projected confidence without arrogance, respect without desperation. He walked away with allies, not just acquaintances. And then there was another man, equally intelligent, equally ambitious, but he never left his chair. Each handshake was half-hearted, his eyes wandering, his posture unmoved. He didn't mean to appear arrogant or detached. It was simply habit. Yet habits speak louder than intentions. Without realizing it, he had erected an invisible barrier between himself and those around him. People still listened to him, but unconsciously they weighed him lighter. His words carried less gravity because his presence had already diminished their weight. This is the lesson the Stoics offer us. Control what is within your reach. Epictetus taught, know first who you are and then adorn yourself accordingly. You cannot control another's judgment. You cannot bend the room to your will, but you can control how you stand, how you look into someone's eyes, how you treat the simplest of interactions as reflections of who you are. Respect is not a demand you force upon others. It is a mirror of how you live in the smallest moments. Think of it this way. We obsess over eloquence, over polished speeches and clever arguments, but respect is rarely forged in paragraphs. It is shaped in seconds, in the way you rise to meet someone, in the steadiness of your gaze, in the quiet confidence of a handshake that says, I am here, I value myself, I value you. These details are not trivial, they are the architecture of presence. Now pause and consider your own daily life. The cafe where you greet a friend. The office where a colleague steps toward you. Even the digital world of virtual meetings where the camera frames only your shoulders. In every place, the principle remains the same. Presence matters. You don't need to be theatrical. You don't need to overperform, but you do need to show that you are awake to the moment. Because if you treat an encounter as disposable, don't be surprised when others treat you the same way. Here lies the danger, underestimating these moments, shrugging and saying, it's just a handshake. But to the Stoic mind, nothing is just. Every small act is training. Every gesture is a mirror of your discipline. When you rise to greet someone, you aren't simply being polite. You are rehearsing strength. You are embodying intention. You are declaring that dignity lives not only in what you say, but in how you live the unnoticed seconds of each day. There is a paradox here. We think respect comes from the big performances, the speech, the achievement, the moment of triumph. Yet so often it is earned or lost in the seconds before any of those unfold. A glance, a rise, a silent but firm acknowledgement that you are equal, ready, unshaken. These are the acts that others remember even if they cannot name why. So let this be your practice. Rise when greeted. Look into the eyes before you. Carry yourself with the quiet weight of someone who does not need to prove anything yet proves everything in the way they stand. Respect is not demanded. It flows naturally from the way you stand in the small moments. And remember this, every handshake paints your portrait. Every small action whispers the truth of your character. People may not remember your words, but they will remember how they felt in your presence. That memory is the seed of respect. So the next time someone steps toward you, whether in a crowded hall, a humble cafe, or even across a screen, rise. Rise as if the act itself declares, I am worthy, and so are you. Meet their eyes. Let silence do the work of 1,000 speeches. For in that moment, before a syllable has been spoken, you have already set the tone. This is the first act of commanding respect. And from here, we move to the next test, not the opening handshake, but the challenge of holding your ground when your words are interrupted, and the world waits to see if you will falter or stand unshaken. Moving into the second chapter, you're speaking, your thought flowing, the eyes of the group briefly on you. Then suddenly, someone cuts across your words, a louder voice, a quicker tongue. The room shifts, the thread of your story unravels, and you feel that sharp burn of being dismissed. It's small, but it pierces. You want to snap back, to reclaim the air with anger. But the Stoics would tell you, this is the very instant where your power is tested. Here's where the paradox reveals itself. We think strength is in the shout, in the comeback, in the fire of words. But true strength, it is in stillness, in the pause, in the refusal to be dragged into another person's storm. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. An interruption is an outside event. You can't stop another's rudeness, but you can decide how to stand in it. So what do? You lift your gaze, calm, steady, silent. The eyes meet theirs, not as daggers, but as iron that will not bend. Let the silence hold. Let the weight of your composure press back against their impatience, because in that silence they are confronted not by your rage, but by their own reflection. It is the most disarming weapon you can wield, calmness where chaos was expected." I remember sitting at a family dinner, telling a story that carried laughter in its tail. Halfway through, a relative interrupted, charging ahead with his own anecdote, stealing the room's attention. My first instinct was to push back, to defend my moment, but instead I stopped. I looked at him, not with anger, not with pleading, just stillness. The table grew quiet, a pause that stretched long enough for everyone to feel the imbalance. He faltered, words stumbling, and within seconds he surrendered the floor back to me. No argument, no escalation, just presence. And in that moment I learned, silence can speak more powerfully than any word. Think about the rooms you've been in, the meetings, the classrooms, the casual circles of friends. How often does the loudest voice win, not because it carries wisdom, but because it drowns the rest? But here's the truth. Volume is not victory. Composure is. When you refuse to be rattled, when you show that interruptions cannot shake your ground, people notice. They may not speak it aloud, but respect gathers around you like quiet gravity. Seneca once warned, anger, if not restrained, is often more hurtful than the injury that provokes it. If you lash out at the one who interrupts, you may feel justified, but you also reveal you've been mastered by your temper. And in the eyes of others, you lose more than the moment. You lose credibility. But if you hold steady, if you meet the disruption with calm authority, you show something rarer. Mastery over yourself. That is the kind of power no one can steal. Of course, silence alone is not the end of it. Once the moment has passed, once the interruption has been checked without words, you must re-enter the flow with grace. A simple phrase, let me pick up where I left off. Nothing sharp, nothing vengeful, just a quiet reclaiming of your space. That phrase is a line drawn in sand. I respect myself enough not to be erased. I respect you enough not to humiliate you, but I will continue. Consider how this works in public settings. A boardroom where someone leaps over your sentence to assert their dominance. A classroom where another voice interrupts before you've finished. Or even a group of friends where one tries to pull laughter away from your words. In all these places, the instinct is to fight for attention, but fighting signals insecurity, holding signals strength. It's not about silencing the other, it's about showing the room that you will not be silenced by anyone. Let's not pretend this is easy. The pull of emotion is strong. That flash of heat in your chest, that tightness in your throat. But this is where philosophy becomes practice. The Stoics trained themselves not in temples or libraries alone, but in the chaos of the marketplace, the forum, the battlefield of everyday life. They asked themselves, what is truly within my control? And the answer was always the same, the mind, the response, the self. So here's the practice. When interruption strikes, breathe before you react. Anchor yourself in silence. Fix your gaze with steadiness, not aggression. Then resume, calmly, as though the disruption never owned you. Each time you do this, you strengthen an inner muscle. Each time you teach yourself and the world that you are not at the mercy of rudeness. You are the master of your presence. And here's the hidden gift. The one who interrupts you expects resistance. They expect fire or fluster or collapse. They want to seize the stage and keep it. But when you meet them with calmness, they are forced to see their own discourtesy exposed. The crowd feels it too. Without a single insult, you have reminded everyone of the unspoken rule. Respect is non-negotiable. This is not about pride. It is not about showing who is above who. It is about dignity, about refusing to let others dictate the value of your voice, about proving to yourself again and again that you can stand in the storm without being carried away. So next time it happens, because it will, remember this. Do not fight for space with volume, hold it with composure. Do not seek to embarrass, seek to embody. And when you pick up where you left off, you will not just finish your thought. You will have shown everyone watching that you are worth listening to, not because you shouted the loudest, but because you stood the calmest. And from here, we advance to an even sharper trial. Those moments when the attempt to silence you doesn't come through interruption, but through humiliation, laughter, and the cutting edge of a public joke. Advancing to the third chapter, not the warm laughter that binds friends together, but the kind that cuts, jagged, mocking, designed to shrink you in front of others. You know the feeling. A story from your past, twisted into a cheap punchline, an old memory pulled out of the shadows, stripped of dignity, dressed up for entertainment. In that moment, your face flushes, your chest tightens, and the instinct to lash out surges like fire. But this is where the Stoic path stands apart. The battlefield is not the room, it is inside you. Here's where many stumble. The world teaches us to fight mockery with louder mockery, to trade insult for insult, to fire back until one side yields. But retaliation keeps you chained to the same game. You win the laugh, perhaps, but lose the deeper battle, control of yourself. The Stoics remind us, what does not touch your essence cannot harm you. The joke stings only if you grant it permission to enter. I remember such a moment with painful clarity. A reunion with old friends, years after school. We sat in a circle, drinks in hand, stories flowing like an old river. Then one friend, with a grin too wide, decided to dig up an embarrassing story from our school days. The room erupted. I felt the flush crawl up my neck, the urge to fire back with my own arsenal of humiliating tales. But then, like a whisper from Seneca himself, the thought struck me. What need is there to weep over parts of life? The whole of it calls for tears. The memory he weaponized was nothing but dust. It could not touch who I had become, so I did something unexpected. I smiled. I tilted my head as though curious, and with calmness I asked, "Could you repeat that?" The air shifted. The laughter that had been loud a second earlier faltered. To repeat the same joke once is to test power. To repeat it again is to expose its emptiness. He stumbled, his voice losing its confidence. The group sensed the awkwardness. What had been a wave of mockery turned into a ripple of silence. The moment passed, and without raising my voice, without insulting anyone, the balance was restored. That is the essence of Stoic power. Not crushing your opponent, not burning them with a sharper line, but standing so unshaken that the storm breaks against you and dissipates. Marcus Aurelius warned himself daily, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That strength is not abstract. It is tested in moments like these, when laughter turns into daggers and you decide whether to bleed or to let it fall harmless to the ground. Let's break down why this works. First, silence unsettles. People expect reaction, anger, defense, shame. When you refuse to deliver it, they are forced to confront themselves. Second, repetition destroys impact. A joke retold rarely carries the same force. It becomes forced, awkward, revealing. And third, calmness redefines the dynamic. You show the room that you are not a puppet pulled by strings of humiliation. You are the one who decides the weight of words. This doesn't mean you must always use the same tactic. Sometimes simply letting the laughter roll off and moving on is enough. Other times, a raised eyebrow, a quiet pause, or even a genuine laugh at yourself can diffuse the sting. The key is never the external technique. The key is your internal state. If you are anchored, the room feels it. If you are shaken, no words can disguise it. Think of the deeper symbolism. A joke meant to humiliate is like a stone thrown into water. If the surface is turbulent, the ripples grow wild. But if the water is calm, the stone sinks and disappears. You are the water. The choice is yours. Now imagine applying this beyond the circle of friends. In workplaces, where colleagues may use humor as a blade. In family gatherings, where old wounds are disguised as just jokes. In every circle, the temptation to humiliate exists. But each time, you have the chance to embody strength. Not the strength of louder noise, but the strength of composure, and here lies the greater victory. Each time you choose calmness, you train yourself. You are not just handling one joke, you are building resilience for every insult, every criticism, every moment of disrespect life will hurl at you. You are writing a script for your soul. I will not be ruled by petty words. I will not let another's attempt to diminish me define who I am. Let me remind you of Epictetus, who said, "If someone speaks ill of you, the only thing you should do is ask yourself, have I done what they said? If you have, correct yourself. If not, laugh at it." This is the posture of the unbreakable mind. If the joke reveals a truth, let it be your teacher. If it does not, let it dissolve like mist in the morning sun. Either way, you remain whole. So what should you remember the next time someone tries to humiliate you with a laugh? First, breathe. Don't react at once. Second, hold the silence or calmly ask them to repeat it. Let the weight of the moment shift naturally. Third, when you respond, do it without heat. A calm tone has more cutting edge than the sharpest insult. And finally, know that every act of composure is a victory, not over them, but over yourself. Humiliation starves when you refuse to feed it with reaction. It feeds on your anger, your shame, your retaliation. Deny it these, and it starves. Leave the joke hanging in the air, and it collapses under its own weakness. So, when the group laughs at your expense, stand steady. Smile if you wish. Ask for the repeat. Watch as the noise fades, as the balance tilts back to you. That is respect. Not the kind demanded, but the kind commanded. And from here, we step into the fourth trial. Not jokes, but provocations aimed like daggers at your heart, where the challenge is not laughter, but the bait of anger itself. Entering the fourth chapter, it is aimed at you in front of others. A remark about your failures, a barb that cuts at the very place you feel most vulnerable. You feel the room turn, eyes shift toward you, hungry for reaction, waiting to see if you will explode or collapse. In that instant, the temptation to defend yourself flares like fire. But this is where Stoicism calls you to a different path. Now picture this scene more vividly. A family gathering, the table heavy with food, the air heavy with unsaid judgments. Someone leans back in their chair, smirks, and says just loud enough for all to hear, "Well, at least you finally tried something, after all those failures." The words land sharp, reopening a wound you thought had healed. You sense the expectation pressing down, your relatives waiting to see if you will burn or break. And yet, instead of rising to the bait, you pause, you breathe, and then, with a calm tone, you ask, "By the way, does anyone know a good bakery nearby? I've been thinking of bringing something sweet for the next gathering." The room shifts, the dagger misses, the tension dissolves. The one who tried to provoke you now sits flustered, their cruelty exposed by your refusal to carry it forward. The conversation rolls elsewhere, the spotlight gone. You remain intact. This is not weakness. This is mastery. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." The provocation was never the real test. The real test was whether you would let their words take command of your spirit. By redirecting the energy, by stepping outside their script, you proved what they could never control, your composure. The brilliance of this technique lies in its simplicity. A sudden shift, an unrelated question, a gentle detour. It derails their train of thought, leaving them stranded on the track. They wanted escalation. They wanted to see you bleed for their entertainment. Instead, they watch as you calmly redirect the current, leaving them powerless. I've witnessed this in practice. A colleague once endured months of snide remarks from a superior who thrived on provocation. During one meeting, that superior made a pointed comment about his lack of experience. The room chuckled nervously, waiting for the clash. But my colleague smiled lightly and asked, "Has anyone tried that new cafe down the street? I've heard they serve the best espresso." The tension snapped like a string pulled too tight. Laughter shifted from cruel to awkward. The superior, robbed of momentum, fumbled and moved on. Respect in the room silently tilted toward the one who stayed composed. Why does this work so deeply? Because composure is rare. Anyone can shout, anyone can argue, but to remain calm in the face of attack, to redirect the fire into smoke, that is uncommon. And in its rarity, it commands respect. It shows you are not a puppet dancing to another's strings. You own the stage, even in silence. This is where Marcus Aurelius's wisdom becomes practical. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. You cannot prevent others from trying to provoke you. People will always exist who thrive on cutting remarks, who need to see others shaken to feel tall. But you can decide how you stand in the face of it. And when you stand calm, you win. Still, let's be clear. This tactic is not about avoidance. It is not running away from the wound. It is choosing to heal by refusing to reopen it. When you shift the conversation with grace, you do not deny the insult. You deny its power. You show that your dignity is not for sale, not even for the price of temporary vindication. To use this well, you must stay natural. Forced detours reveal themselves as desperation. But a question delivered with ease about a restaurant, a recent movie, or even the weather carries weight because it does not fight the insult. It floats past it. That subtlety is the difference between appearing evasive and appearing unshaken. Over time, this practice does more than diffuse provocations. It builds resilience. Each time you choose calm over reaction, you remind yourself of your own strength. You carve into your character the truth that no one else's words can dictate your worth. People around you will sense it. They may not name it, but they will respect it. Because they see in you something they long for themselves, the ability to remain sovereign in the storms of human interaction. Think of life as a constant play of sparks. Some sparks are meant to light the way, others are meant to burn you down. The untrained mind throws fuel on every spark and ends in flames. The trained mind lets the sparks fall harmlessly to the ground. That is the art of Stoicism, choosing which fires are worth tending and which are not worth your breath. So the next time someone aims a barb at you, pause, let silence be your shield. Then ask a question that steers the room away from conflict. Watch as the energy shifts. Notice how their attempt to provoke collapses under its own weight, and in that moment, know this. You did not just win a social game, you won the battle within. Power is not the noise that fills a room, but the presence that cannot be shaken. Respect grows not when you dominate, but when you demonstrate that you cannot be dominated. And from here, we step into the final lesson, not just how to deflect insults, but how to walk away entirely when dignity demands it. At this stage, we arrive at the final lesson, walking away. Not storming out in anger, not slamming doors to make a scene, but the quiet, deliberate act of refusing to remain where your worth is diminished. Few things cut deeper than feeling invisible, to give your best, only to be ridiculed, to bring value, only to be dismissed. It twists inside you, draining energy until you question yourself. And yet, sometimes the most powerful way to reclaim dignity is to simply stand, gather your strength, and leave. Now imagine this. You've been giving everything, your time, your effort, your loyalty, yet instead of respect, you receive condescension. Meetings where your ideas are brushed aside, conversations where your voice is drowned out. Days when your presence feels more like a target than a contribution. The temptation is to try harder, to prove yourself to those who refuse to see. But the Stoics would warn, you do not need to beg for what is freely given by the wise. Respect cannot be forced from the unwilling. A friend of mine, Sarah, lived this truth. She was a gifted creative, relentless in her work. She joined a major project at her company, pouring herself into every task. But instead of recognition, she was ridiculed by her manager. Meetings became arenas where her ideas were dismissed. Jokes were made at her expense. For months, she told herself she just needed to push harder, to endure. But then came a day that changed everything. Once more, her contribution was brushed aside, not because it lacked value, but because someone chose not to see. Sarah didn't argue. She didn't plead. She closed her laptop. She stood, and with calm, she said she would put her energy where it was valued. She walked out, not in anger, but in quiet certainty. That same day, she handed in her resignation. Months later, she joined another company, this time in leadership. The same ideas that had been ridiculed were now celebrated. The same talent that had been ignored became the foundation of her new role. Her story is not about leaving, it is about choosing where to invest the fire of her life, choosing not to waste herself on barren soil. This is what walking away means. It is not defeat. It is declaration. It is saying, I know my worth, and I will not remain where it is trampled. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Staying in disrespectful places is a choice. Leaving is also a choice. One diminishes you. the other preserves you. Here's the paradox. We are taught to endure, to stay, to prove ourselves worthy of acknowledgement. But endurance without respect is erosion. The longer you stay where you are not valued, the more you hand over your power. Walking away is not weakness. It is the boundary that protects your essence. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." Sometimes courage is not found in fighting harder, but in stepping away. Ask yourself, how do you know when it's time? It is time when all your efforts meet indifference, when every contribution is swallowed by silence, when your soul grows heavy and you feel yourself shrinking. Do not wait until your self-esteem is ashes. Listen earlier. Recognize the signs. The absence of respect is not a storm you must weather. It is a signal, a sign telling you that your worth belongs elsewhere. Remember this: walking away does not create drama. It ends it. It does not scream. It whispers, but its echo is louder than any protest. It says, "I am not yours to belittle." It says, "My presence is not for sale." It says, "I will not fight to exist where I am unseen." And strangely, it is often only in your absence that those who mocked begin to understand what they lost. The world confuses noise with strength, but silence is sharper. And leaving is the sharpest silence of all. It is not about revenge. It is not about teaching them a lesson. It is about teaching yourself one, that your energy is sacred, that your dignity is worth guarding, that respect is not begged for, it is built by the way you choose to treat yourself. So if you find yourself undervalued, disrespected, or ignored, remember this truth. You are not bound to stay. Your worth is not tied to one place, one group, or one table. Sometimes the most stoic action is to stand, turn, and walk toward a life where you are not tolerated, but respected. Because in the end, absence that commands respect is far greater than presence that is diminished. And with that, we close this journey. 5 ways to command respect, not by force, but by mastery of self. Every journey toward respect begins within. You have walked through these lessons with me, and now it is your turn to put them into practice. What matters is not perfection, but the courage to rise again each time life challenges you. Your story, your struggles, and your victories are all proof that strength is built in the quiet choices you make every day. If today's message spoke to you, I invite you to stay connected by subscribing. That way, you can continue shaping your inner discipline and finding clarity in a noisy world. And I would love to hear from you. Share your thoughts or your story in the comments. If you are not sure what to write, simply type the words, "Stay strong." It will serve as a reminder to yourself and to others that you choose dignity over reaction, calm over chaos. Your engagement is what keeps this community of seekers alive. Together, we grow in wisdom, learning to turn obstacles into opportunities and pain into power. So, carry this with you into tomorrow. Remember that respect is not demanded, it is lived. Let your presence be steady, your voice calm, and your choices firm. And when the next challenge comes, meet it not with fear, but with quiet strength. I look forward to walking with you in the next step of this journey.